C'est mon père, ça me fait bien tiens. Tu me fais dire non tout, elle a one radio. C'est mon père, tu me fais bien tiens. Tu me fais dire non tout, elle a one radio. Oh, and you punchima, chim, asam punchima.
Era One radio listeners, we are back again. We are live. We've been absent for a couple of weeks, but thank God we are back into the studio. It's the usual team, the usual formidable team. Ms. Saban is here in the studio. Uncle Max is here. And we're going to continue with our discussion. I think the last time we left, we were dealing with the inductive versus deductive reason or reflection on the God-grown trees. Tonight, we're going to look at the propositions that were made by Eve and the serpent in the garden. This is a very crucial topic, very, very crucial topic, because what we are going through in these days is kind of, something that we have to try. But before I do, I will just ask Nisaban to give us introduction. Let me see. I don't know whether I'm still on. There's something going on with this thing.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, okay. I can hear you.
All right. So we haven't been here in a while, so I'll just ask for any shout outs if you have any shout outs to give before. I know we are 6 minutes late, but then of course I can't do without introducing you or Uncle Max. So any shout out, any greetings that you want to introduce us to?
Oh no. I mean thank God we are alive and everything is fine here in the US. We are still trying to see if we can bring Trump to justice. Thank God the Congress has come up with a measure to avert and avoid the budget shutdown. I mean, so yes, federal workers like me will still continue to have our paychecks coming. And then
Amen.
Ghana, hey, the NPP has Dr. Baumia as their
flag bearer.
Exciting.
Oh, so that was your prediction. That was your.
I knew that was going to be. I knew from day one.
Wow.
And nothing happened to change my opinion.
So he's your favorite candidate. That's what you're saying.
He is the next president of Ghana. He will be the one sworn in on the 2024 December.
And not Mahama.
No. As far good.
This is interesting, because I thought by Baumia Kame it's a cool chop, it's a done deal for Mahama, but you are saying otherwise.
No. When I say things, trust me. I said the next president of Ghana is Dr. Baumia, not Mahama.
Well, I know Uncle Max has something otherwise.
Yeah, that's why his name Max Vaden. The honorable, all-knowing Max Vaden.
That one is God you're talking about, not me. Honorable God.
Uncle Max.
Yes, sir.
Uncle Max.
Yeah.
Nisaba says, I think we're having a double feedback.
What?
Okay. Well, Nisaba says Dr. Baumia is the next president. Do you agree?
Yes, there's a strong possibility, but I am not sure that he will get the nod, because people are really, really upset with the NPP and with Dr. Baumia because he made promises which he was been unable to keep. Apart from that, it would seem that he's been very uneven in his treatment of the Boko crisis. And I think that also is going to upset a lot of people. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a skirt and blouse pattern to voting next year. You know, where they vote for one person for president, but they vote for the other party.
The other party
for parliament. Yeah. Having said all of that, we shouldn't discount the possibility of a third force emerging. I attended earlier today a symposium, I should call it, Achimota Speaks, which is part of an ongoing series. And the question on the table was whether the country is in crisis and do we need a new economic model, a new way forward. So an economist was invited to speak, and he shared his thoughts, having done a lot of analysis and actually having done some field work as well in Ghana, in Kumawu, where he's from. And there were two former bankers who were invited on as panelists. And one of them said, well, whatever institution you have, if it is not self-regulating, is going to fail. And he drew parallels to Ghana and how so many of our institutions, including our governance structures, are not self-regulating. The other speaker, the other panelist, also put the blame on our constitution, which manifestly does not work. And of course, the chairman of the occasion was none other than Nana Dr. SKB Asante, who was one of the experts who contributed to our current constitution. So in his closing remarks, he made the point that we had come to discuss economics, not the constitution, or not constitutional reform, and that the constitution he thought was okay, except that people abused the constitution. And that's why we are where we are. That's a moot point, of course, because you draw up a constitution in order to regulate the behavior of people who can not otherwise be entrusted or trusted to stay on the straight and narrow. So to that extent, the constitution is failing us. You understand? And so the way forward is a little bit unclear because there are people who are talking about basically ditching the two mainstream parties and looking for a third alternative. And a few third alternatives in the wings as we speak, who make a lot more sense than the current two.
All right.
Well,
we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. Let me
get double
echoes. Good.
Okay. All right. Tonight we're going to look at the propositions that were made by even the SERPENT. We had a little bit of surface scratch the last time we left, but maybe we might have time to go deeper, although we have, I think, 47 minutes left. But then we live in an age where technology has so advanced that humanity has begun to question the existence of God as the orchestrator of creation. I believe we all did a personal encounter with God. Growing up, we believed unreservedly in the Bible. However, for some time now, I'm not sure if people are bored and for some, there have been theories that have evolved to challenge the origin of creation and the existence of God. Recently, a 10-year-old has granted an interview that has shaken the foundation of some Christians. As for me, like I always say, I'm always reading and expanding my knowledge. Each of us needs a supernatural encounter with God to rest the qualms going around. It is no coincidence that ICGC, is International Central Gospel Church, is holding a 2-day summit that is 16 today and tomorrow, 17 November, to address issues like who created God, or who is God's mother? Why did God allow the devil to move from heaven to come and torment mankind? Why has God not dealt with sin completely? So for those of us on this platform, and for that matter, Divine Connection, we started dealing with this topic, or what happened in the garden concerning the trees that were meant to be eaten, the disobedience that occurred, and where mankind has now found itself. Tonight, we're going to go back and address some of these issues. And so I will take us quickly to Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. I'll read just the verse 1. And then we'll kick it from there, because that is where most of our meat is going to go from. So it says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, yea, had God said, ye shall not eat of the tree of every kind, every tree of the garden? Let me go to the 2. And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And then the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not die, ye shall not surely die, for God knoweth that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Uncle Max, let me start with you. Let me ask this question. It's a little bit off tangent, but we'll go there before we come to our question. I believe most of the qualms, question, doubt, what about going on in our generation now, is because the Bible happens to be the basic instruction for believers before leaving earth. That is the acronym of whatever it is. But it looks as if of late there's been so many people who have come up with teachings to actually deny the Bible and all that. And I believe if God were to come and do a press conference, I believe it will settle all our doubts. Why is God not doing a press conference for us?
Well, I think God is actually doing a press conference. It's just that we are not listening to the press conference. We saw or shared in earlier broadcasts that God manifests his word, his teaching, in 2 major vectors. One is the book, and the other is nature. One is the book, the other is nature. And if one were to examine nature at a very cursory level, for example, it would be very, one should realize that nothing in nature exists by itself. Everything is interconnected with everything else. And everything serves something else other than itself. So that's a big, big lesson that we should have learned from childhood, that we are not individuals living unto ourselves. Somebody shared a meme this morning, which said that we should thank God when we wake up in the morning, but we should realize also that God hasn't given us an extra day for us. God has given us an extra day for somebody. There's somebody out there who needs our services. And this is one of the core lessons you get from studying nature in the right way. God is also manifesting his presence and his entreaties, if you like, with all the very, very positive stories that one hears about people helping each other and supporting each other and essentially demonstrating the love that we have been asked to have for our neighbor. Yeah. Every mother experiences this love. It's unfortunate that they don't extend it to everybody, so that those of us who are not mothers can also learn from mothers as to what true unconditional love looks like. Yeah, so we can practice that also. So I think God is giving that press conference, but we are not listening because we have been distracted and our attention has been diverted by all the material goodies that flood the marketplace every day and flood the airwaves and our cell phones and so on. So we get distracted, but we are listening to the wrong message.
Too many distractions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me come to Nisaba. Nisaba, of course, you heard me read the Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, where there was this 1 through, I think, 4, so where the dialogue took place between Eve and the serpent. And I'll be careful not to use the word devil. Now, I don't know whether you want to go back a little bit and hint a little bit on Eve's issue before we come to it. But then, what were some of the flaws in the serpent's argument? Because it looks as if the serpent was basing his argument or his responses from what the woman told or responded to. So I don't know whether you want to backtrack or you want to stand on them and give us the flaws in the argument that the serpent presented.
Thank you, Dr. Boison, and thank you, Uncle Max, for that wonderful expose from that very acute angle. Dr. Boison.
Yes, sir.
First, let's clear some things. Give me the license to say certain things.
How much are you going to pay for the license?
We'll talk about it.
All right, go ahead.
Uncle Max.
License approved.
I think what I have observed with how we take the Bible is what somebody would describe as eisegetic approach to Bible understanding and interpretation instead of exegetic. The difference is exegetic simply means you are taking the text as is and you are basing your judgments, your interpretation on what is on the page. Eisegetic, on the other hand, is where an individual imports some foreign material and then superimposes that foreign material on the text at hand. And what I would like us to understand with that is the author of a text, whether the Bible or anything, is telling a story. Every author is telling a story. And so it is up to you, the reader or the interpreter, to go by what the author has said, not what you think. And so, Dr. Boison, when you read Genesis chapter 3, where we encounter man and the serpent, we have to understand that the man here, the woman here, God and the serpent are all characters. They are all characters. And they are under the thumb of the author. Whatever the author decides to have a particular character do, that is the author's prerogative. So, whoever the author of the Bible is, and we believe it was Moses, but we also know that Moses was not present when some of the events in the Bible, in fact, the whole of Genesis, everything that happened there happened before Moses was born. So somebody other than Moses would be the narrator of the events to the author called Moses. So let's get something straight. When we come to Genesis chapter 3, the character called the serpent was not the devil. If as part of the author's development of that character, down the line, that character will become the devil, that is fine. But as of Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 all the way to the end of Genesis chapter 3, that character there is the serpent, a snake.
Just a snake. Just a snake.
Not the devil.
A speaking snake.
Yes. And that's why I made the point that one of the liberties of an author is to imbue his characters with certain attributes. So in this particular case, in this particular character's situation, this snake, the author has decided that that snake would be the type of snake who could speak to humans. Or the man and the woman here, and precisely the woman, Eve, will have the ability to speak the language of animals and therefore be able to communicate. So whether this dialogue took place in animal linguistics or human linguistics, at least there was communication. Either the human beings have the ability to speak animal language, or this particular snake had the ability to speak human language. Whatever it is, this is what the author has chosen to equip his characters with, and we can't fight it.
So can we assume all the snakes at that time were able to speak and not
I won't speculate to that extent, but at least this particular snake could speak because, Dr. Boison, this is what the author did. In verse 1 of chapter 3, he decided to go with description. And as we've alluded to, we've said this over and over on this platform, an author, every writing, as part of the exposition, an author will have, will use one of the 6 main patterns of exposition, which we call text structure, description, time order, cause and effect, compare and contrast, argument, and problem and resolution. One of them as his method of exposition. So Dr. Boison, here, the author has chosen to present us with a situation. God had spoken, had told Adam and Eve about something they could do and something they could not do. And here was the serpent coming in and saying something different. And to make us very aware of what the author was going to say, he decided to give us a description of this character. He said, this character was more subtle than any of the beasts of the field the Lord God himself had made.
Yeah, he didn't use the lion, the snake.
So we have to get this picture clear. The subtlety of this snake, God made it so. So this snake was acting in character and not out of character. So, Dr. Boison, with that foundation laid, let's now attack the problem head on.
Problem of the day.
God had told Adam and Eve, you could eat of every tree in the garden, except one. And when God said so, he mentioned the name of the tree that must not be eaten. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He was specific. He was explicit. And he said, in the day you eat of that tree, you shall, authoritative language, shall surely die. Dr. Boison, one of our confusion is that we thought when God said that, it meant that the very moment they would eat of that tree, they will fall down and die. But that is not what the text is saying. Well, Adam and Eve will know 930 years later that they would die. So whatever God said ultimately came to pass. So we have to get that out of the ground, out of the way. Then we come to chapter 3, and then the serpent, which had been made subtle by God Almighty, deliberately engage the two human beings, especially the woman,
Mrs. Adam.
Thank you. And then he asks the question, has God said you cannot eat anything of the garden? Yes.
That was a strategic
we have
way
to
of
understand something. When the author said this snake was subtle, it becomes something we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's a clue.
Therefore, the author is going to do what a good author does. A good author does not tell. A good author shows. So everything we are going to see from now on is showing what subtlety is.
And not telling.
Not telling. So we have to understand these things. And unfortunately, Dr. Boison, for Christians, this is where we see the devil and the serpent becoming synonymous. And I'm saying no, because if we do that, we will be telling our story, not the author of this text telling his story. So let's understand this. At this point, at least, this character was a snake and not the devil. He says, has God said you cannot eat anything? Of course, that was a very general question, all-embracing, all-encompassing. As if God would be this mean-looking God, mean-spirited, will create his own creature and decide to starve it. But that's part of subtlety. You getting me? Hide your intentions. Ask questions in such a way that the person answering will say things to commit him or herself. So you can come up with follow-up
question.
That's what subtlety is. Hide your intentions. Try to be the advocate or the friend of the person you are dealing with, as if you are on his or her side. That is subtlety. Whilst in actual fact, you have an agenda that may have something to do with that person or not at all, but that person becomes a means to an end. That is subtlety. And that's the story the author is telling here. Let's fast forward. Eve says, according to verse 2, and the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. Let's pause. Was that what God said?
No.
That is you getting me. That's what the author wants us. God said you may eat of the trees of the garden. He said you may eat of the fruit. They are two different things. Fruits are not the only part of a tree, or for that matter, the only edible part of a tree.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for Eve, but was she confused, or she was just trying to synonymously align fruit and tree to be the same thing?
Well, if you want to do that, then be as correct as possible. Fruit and trees are not synonymous.
I mean,
unless, of course, you are going to say you are using what we call, is it synodoky or metonymy, where the part stands for the whole or the whole for the part. But that is not what the author is doing here. So we don't have the liberty to introduce synodoky here. If actually, let's put it this way.
Uncle Max, you can
come whenever you want. If you want to.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
You understand? If, let's say, as the American will say, goofed. Yes, she did. You getting me? That is number one. She also said, not only we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but she went on to say, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. God never said the fruit of that tree, said of the tree called the garden, called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God didn't restrict it to fruit. God said you may not eat of it. She again restricted it to the fruit. Not only that, God never said they should not touch it. She said, God said they must not touch it. Again, what is happening here? The author is taking his time to develop a character. Are you getting me? To develop a character or develop characters in order to tell the sort of story he had in mind.
Nisaba, let me give you a break. You've been talking. I want you to take a little break. I don't want your throat to dry. Let me ask Uncle Max a quick question. In reference to this 10-year-old who was asking a question about why God created sin if he didn't want us to sin. Uncle Max, let me just let you address.
I think
you've said it before.
You said it before.
But I want to make sure you can address it so that, if our 10-year-old is listening, maybe he can pick a cue. Okay, so God told our foreparents, you can eat all but then the one tree of knowledge of, don't touch it. The boy's question is, why would a good God create something that he knows that you are going to goof up, like Nisaban said, and put it there for them to do it and goof off?
That's indeed a very deep question. And I think we need to try and put ourselves in God's shoes. We are accustomed to thinking of God as being a finite and absolute, how should I put it, being. Yeah. And at the same time, we also have to grapple with the idea that God is infinite and is eternal. God is everywhere and is also everywhere when. Now, if that is so, then we have to consider the possibility that God is an unfinished symphony. God is an evolving experience. It's hard to put words on it, but let's say God is a dynamic, as we like to put it, it's a living God. It's not a static being. Given that situation, then we have to try and envisage a God that is keen to add to itself, to himself, to his experience, and to his universe, which is not static. So God populates the universe with beings like ourselves who are given a modicum of free will in which to explore, in which to experiment, okay? And at the same time, we are given operating instructions that we should refrain from doing this or we should refrain from doing that. So it's not as though we are given unlimited opportunity. The opportunities we have are constrained. And they are constrained by physics, they are constrained by chemistry, they are constrained by biology, and most importantly, they are constrained by what we call ethics and morality, which is God's message to us that we should do unto others as we would have them do unto us.
Amen.
And that we should respect others and so on. So we have a certain amount of latitude. We should remember also that there is this idea that whatever we do, whatever action we engage in, has or induces an opposite reaction, although not necessarily at the same time. So we have a situation where God has created so many different species and so on, given us instructions, and basically says, okay, now you guys go and play. So we are...
All right, Uncle Max, it's getting a little bit spotty.
Okay. Can I try a different...
please do. I believe Nisa might taking a break.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me just try and finish off quickly.
Okay.
So from God's perspective, okay, whatever we do has a consequence. And so God's universe remains in balance. Whatever we do. But it is up to us whether we do things that will generate positive results, outcomes, or they will generate for us negative outcomes. But God is not, how should I put this, disturbed, because in his perfect universe, everything balances out.
You're getting a double echo, and I think my system is telling me you need
let
me do this. Let me close down one feed.
Yeah. Yes, I think you can pick up on that. I think you've taken a little bit of a break. So you can from there. I think Uncle Max is having some double echo issues. Yeah.
Okay.
You might need a headphone.
Okay. Dr. Boison. We as I said, we are going strictly by the text, right? Just trying to understand where the author was going with this text. The serpent tells, or the author is painting a picture showing us what subtlety is based on the back and forth, the dialogue. And Dr. Boison, again, we must understand that one of the cardinal pursuits of an author is to, if possible, give us access to the mind of the character. Mm-hmm. And one of the way an author does that is through dialogue. Because when an author gives us a dialogue, the author takes himself or herself out of the picture. So you meet the characters by way of their actions and by way of their speech. And you are able to determine the believability of a particular character. And here you have, again, the author painting the picture of subtlety. You getting me? So this is what is happening in the text at this time. Eve, we have realized the author has painted a picture of Eve as someone who had the tendency to add to the instruction she had received. And therefore, the author is setting us up to see how a subtle serpent will take advantage of that. Are you getting the picture clear? So the woman now says, God said, the tree we must not eat, we must not eat of, is in the midst of the garden. Wait a minute. Dr. Boison, God was explicit in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. God was explicit as to the tree that should not be eaten. He said, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And if you go back to verse 2, chapter 2, verse 9, we know that, Dr. Boison, the tree that was explicitly mentioned as being located in the midst of the garden was the tree of life. Let that sink in. The tree that was explicitly mentioned as being in the midst of the garden was the tree of life. We could add the predicate in the midst of the garden to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But
so the night that adds, okay, let me read the night. It says, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Yes.
So that doesn't say both of them were in the midst, the middle.
You see, this is where careful reading then comes in. You will realize that, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, comma. That's one thought.
Okay.
And good for food. That's another thought. Dr. Boison, the author is building propositions here.
With colons.
So these are atomic sentences or atomic propositions.
Okay.
Right? And said, verse 9, right?
Yeah.
And said, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden. Right? Comma. That is another proposition. and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That is another proposition. That is serious analysis now. So, as I said, if we are to be charitable towards the reader, right? If we are going to be charitable to the reader, we could say, okay, the predicate in the midst of the garden could be extended to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But it was not explicitly stated. So the author knew what he was trying to do when he used the comma. This is where punctuations become very important as thought markers. So if we are going to go strictly according to the rules of proposition, only the tree of life was located in the midst of the garden. However, if we are going to be expansive and be charitable, we could also say that in the midst of the garden as a predicate would also be extended to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That is what we have to. If with that done, let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, Dr. Boison. In chapter 3, what Eve said, right? He said, I think there is a feedback.
Yeah, I think Uncle Mark's listening. I had to mute him here. Go ahead.
Okay. In verse 2, this is what the woman said. And the woman said, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. Dr. Boison, God explicitly mentioned the tree that must not be eaten. And said that tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here we have Eve giving us the location of the tree. And so, Dr. Boison, let's ask ourselves, if we are going to go strictly by the rules of proposition, which tree was Eve referring to as the one not to be eaten? It will be the tree of life, because that was what it was in the midst of it. Are you getting me? If charity enters into the equation and we extend the predicate in the midst of the garden to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have two trees now located in the midst of the garden. Which of them was Eve referring to? That is what, again, Dr. Boison, what I'm putting across is this. The author is building or is developing characters. So the author is deliberate in what he is writing here. Developing a character called Eve with this, call it a bit uneven characteristics, right? Being not, should I say, careful enough, but still a character, in order to tell the story he wants to tell. And then you have the serpent, Dr. Boison. Let's look at the way the author puts it. This is the way the author puts it. In verse 5, she says, the serpent said, for God, and the serpent in verse 4, the serpent says, and the serpent said unto the woman, you shall not surely die. Direct contradiction of what God said. God said you shall not eat. He said you shall surely die. He said you shall not surely die. Direct contradiction. Again, the author is developing this character called the serpent. And then verse 5 is where the controversy sets in. Verse 5, the author says, for God, this is the serpent talking, for God knows that in the day you eat thereof, that word thereof is a very controversial, because the thereof actually means considering what has been mentioned
earlier.
So that thereof has to do with what Eve said, the tree that Eve had made mention of. And so, Dr. Boison, which tree did Eve say was not to be eaten? Was it the tree of life or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? If those two trees were in the midst of the garden, if we are going by the grace of charity, you're getting the confusion. So again, Dr. Boison, this is my claim. The Bible was written to train the mind for critical and careful thinking. So the author has introduced problems, issues, situations to bring out the subtlety of
the serpent.
And they call it the distressing attributes of Eve in order to tell a certain story. Are we getting the picture clear? So we have to do a good job of allowing the author to talk. The author must speak. We must follow what the author is saying and not put words or ideas or thoughts into the characters that the author has not authorized us to. We go by the text. Now, Dr. Boison, first problem. The serpent says, for God knows. He said, you shall not surely die. Direct contradiction. For God knows. Again, Dr. Boison, this is an argument marker. Argument marker. For is a reason indicator in an argument. So, you shall not surely die becomes the conclusion of this argument. What will follow from for will be the premises. This is the serpent's first premise. I know what God knows. When he said, for God knows that in the day, which means the serpent was saying, I know what God knows. Oh, because where did he get that information from? Again, the author was developing a character. If that character will morph later into the serpent, into the devil, we are beginning to see the genesis of it. But at this point, it was still a snake. Now, this serpent didn't stop there. First, this serpent has introduced two issues. One, you shall not surely die. Two, I know what God knows. Then your eyes shall be opened. God never mentioned opening of eyes. Right? And ye shall be as gods. God never mentioned man
to be God.
Like gods. And then he goes on to say, you shall know good and you shall know evil. Yes, God said that, but God said that indirectly. Because knowing good and evil right, were part of the trees. We had the concept of knowledge introduced in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. You have the concept of good introduced in verse 9. You have the concept of evil. You have the concept of good. You have the concept of knowledge. You have all of them were introduced in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. So the serpent didn't introduce this concept of knowing good and evil here, but the serpent introduced 4 things. I know what God knows. You shall not surely die. Your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods. You get the picture now. A careful author, carefully developing a character. So, Dr. Boison, back to you. And let Uncle Mas also.
Thank you very much. I think Uncle Mas has been very, unfortunately, he's been very spotty today. So he kind of, his internet kind of knocked him out. But then it's already 7 o'clock, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. But just summarize for us, what will be our contemporary study for tonight? I mean, with this subtlety of the serpent and the premises that Eve came from, what did we learn tonight? What do you want our listeners to take home with tonight?
Dr. Boison, I don't want to sound too academic or maybe too intellectual, but I have to.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it is one of the prongs of the Bible, intellectual development. Dr. Boison, in writing, right, what we call imaginary writing or imaginative writing, which is not necessarily a fiction, but can come from what we call experiential situations, right? One of the things in developing a character is first to create a character with certain attributes. And I will use this occasion to answer that little boy's question. Dr. Boison, whenever you want to unleash the story, whether true story or just novel or whatever, imaginative writing, we have what we call the inciting or the initial incident. The incident that acts as the trigger for all other incidents, and where we actually come to meet the character or characters and the interactions of the characters or their actions will reveal the plot of the story, the events that happen. Why is this important? Dr. Boison, in writing a believable text, narrative, what have you, there are 2 things an author has to deal with. Either to create a character with needs, and the other one is a character with wants, or at least a want. When you create a character with needs, you have created a character with fate hanging over his head. When you create a character with want, you have created a character with desire, and therefore choice, and therefore will. Because, Dr. Boison, you cannot judge a fated man. Because if that is the character's fate, that the character must die this way and must act this way, you've taken the power of discretion and choice away from the character. How then can you judge him?
He must necessarily act what is been destined.
You getting me? So we are looking at this test with God, at least the author trying to show us rather than telling us that God created a character with the reservation that the character will be given the free choice to act, because that character has desires and therefore has wants and therefore has what? Will. And it is because of the will and the exercise of it that God's judgment and mercy, whatever, will become relevant. Other than that, God will become a dictator, a tyrant.
So basically saying that God gives us our will to do whatever we want to do. But at the same time, too, we are responsible for what we do. If we goof off, then we'll meet his judgment.
Because if you are not given the will to do what you want to do vis-a-vis the requirements, which is the law, because the law cannot come at you if the law takes away your right to act. Are you getting the point, Clay?
I'm getting.
God, as the law, must necessarily give man the permission and the permission and the choice to act in order for man to have a will.
Well, this takes me back to my question again. We'll continue next week. I'll give Uncle Max a minute to give his closing remarks, since his system was a little bit spotty for him. I'm sure he has a message, a contemporary message for us today from the message, from what we've learned today. Uncle Max, you can come in with your closing remarks. I know the system hasn't favored you too much. You can unmute yourself and then, give us your remarks.
Okay, well, I think Dr. Pastor Krong, how should I put it, captured what I was trying to say. But to put it a slightly different way, if we had no choice and therefore no opportunity to sin because we have no choice, then basically we stop being human beings. We become robots. We become automatons.
Maybe that would have helped us.
Well, sometimes you look at some people and you wonder whether they are just an artificial intelligence, you understand, as opposed to a full human being. But yes, that's the bottom line. And so the answer to the little boy is, which would you rather be? Somebody with choice or a robot with no choice?
Thank you.
I will sleep all right. Find out whether This about what did you say?
I said you also have a problem.
Yeah. I think the echo is. I guess I have to mute Uncle Max, and then I can speak without any problem. But whilst it's on, that is so we'll have to fix this thing next. So, well, listeners, sorry for the glitches. Sometimes stuff happens. Sometimes we have a full-fledged day without any incident, and at times stuff happens. So I want to thank my gentlemen for availing themselves one more time. It's 7:08. We've gone beyond the time, and since US changed their time, we went back 1 hour, so it's now 12 midnight in Ghana. So Uncle Max is ready to hit the rack. So Uncle Max, have a good evening, and Nisaba. I'll meet you guys here next week, the Lord tarries. Have a good evening, and as usual, listeners, please share the clip. Go back to YouTube and Facebook, and download the clip, or just go ahead and just reel through the videos or the recordings. And it's better if you watch the previous broadcast. That way you understand the trend that we are going. And I thought we were going to go at a appreciable page today, but we still couldn't go that much. There's still meat to be uncovered and covered and all that. So we'll continue. We see where the Spirit of God will lead us. But until then, have a good evening and take care. All right. Bye.
Bye,
everybody.
All righty.
C'est mon père, Sampadiatia, Timothy die non kotu, era one radio. Samupe, Jumpadiatia, Timothy die non kotu, era one radio. Oh.